You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast, and today we become Race Control. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. I have gathered you here today because of the unceremonious sacking of the race director with just 3 races to go, with 2 titles still technically up for grabs. And I would say that right now the F1's ruling body has never been in such a shambles. You've got senior figures leaving. You've got zero consistency for stewarding, racing rules that are beyond farce and have caused very predictable and predicted problems. We've got muddles in decisions in session, and we've got the drivers basically in open rebellion because we took away their special naughty word. So we're going to solve that today. Me and Brad are going to become Race Control because we are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind support of our patrons and partners. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined by my co-race director, Brad Philpott. Brad, we're in charge now.
That's good. I've been asking for this for ages, so I'm glad you brought me on. I'm looking forward to talking about this. What I haven't got is like a set of rules that I've written down, so I hope no one's expecting that. We don't have anything codified yet, but I'm looking forward to discussing it.
Brad, we just got the job, right? So this is our discussion point now. Us and the patrons in the patron Discord. Go there by joining us there at patreon.com/missedapex, and you'll be linked into our Discord chat. We've got people watching live. So hello, Nick. Hello, Brad. Other Brad. We've got Mark there as well. We've got EJ, Marcio, all our Discord friends. So we're going to come up with some racing rules. I think firstly, let's cover the news. So it's Niels Wittich was sacked as race director, and the Telegraph has it written as after falling out with the FIA president. I've heard reports as well that basically he was in conflict with the drivers over the swearing. It's really messy. It sounds like they've had a bit of a basically a fallout between the FIA and the drivers, and that Wittich is the collateral damage.
Yeah, this is a bit confusing because in terms of the swearing side of things, I would be very surprised if the race director has anything to do with that. The race director is there to run the race event itself, apply the rules as they pertain to the circuit stuff. So I'd be surprised if that was him. That seems a bit more of like the FIA president edict about that was like his personal crusade, the jewelry, the underwear, and the swearing, as the driver's letter kind of mentioned, and named Mohammed bin Salman kind of personally as well. But yeah, maybe Wittich has been just caught in the crossfire or become a bit of a scapegoat. I didn't personally see anything from him in particular that I necessarily disagreed with. I think the steward's decisions, again, are kind of separate to race director. It's not necessarily like all the same. It doesn't mean everything we've seen and agreed with or disagreed with on track has been him making that decision. He kind of refers things to the stewards, and then the stewards tend to make a decision one way or another. So, yeah, I think the thing that I take away from this is that the FIA once again have tried to provide a bit of misinformation. And I think in their initial release, they said that he had left or he'd resigned or something to that effect.
Yeah,
and then when
away,
actually asked, he clarified, no, I was sacked. And, with no notice, essentially. So there was clearly some kind of acrimony that went on there that we don't know all the details of.
And I wonder if we're going to get to know, because if he's just been sacked like that and he doesn't think it's his fault, he's not going to maybe sign an NDA in the same way that Michael Massey did. So I don't know if that's confirmed, but it seems like Michael Massey signed an NDA. That's why we've had no real answers from him about 2021.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's also not really been anything remotely as controversial. So I don't really know what he could reveal other than, the normal working processes of a race director's job. He hasn't really been embroiled in a particular controversy as far as I know. So it's more just, maybe it's a style disagreement. Maybe Ben Salem wanted to be seen to be doing something proactive after that driver's letter. But yeah, whatever the reason, there's this this vacancy now, this opening for us.
Yes,
And,
I mean, it's come at a
happy to
great
step
time.
into it.
It's come at a great time. Obviously, you will still have time to do sim coaching in between doing race directing in F1 races.
That's good.
So we will have the links to all Brad's stuff in the show notes once the show is published. You won't find a better sim coach or on-track coach than Brad. He's a premium instructor, so I urge you all to go and have a session with him. He will find you seconds. If you're at the sort of amateur dad that just gets on every now and then, and every single time you go on there's an update and you don't get to play anyway, if that's the level of you're at, Brad will find you seconds on track. I think we could probably almost guarantee it. Now, there's a great a post by @F1 Big Data that's just been linked in the Discord that shows all the things that have kind of been building up over the last couple of years, and it's been very messy and very hands-on, and I think that's what the Drivers Association led by George Russell was trying to say. Like, don't tell us about jewelry, don't talk to us about our underwear, don't fine us, like just random fines that are made out of nowhere. Oh, you owe us £50,000 now. I think Russell openly questioned where that money actually goes. So I'm not going to go through the whole list, but it has been messy. And I know a lot of people go, well, this never happened back when Charlie Whiting was the race director. You know, if only we could bring back Charlie. You know, he's been missed. He passed away, sadly. And I on the one hand, I go, well, is it a bit more to do with the overall leadership and how much of it is coming from the FIA president? Because there was no crossover between Whiting and Ben Sulayem. But the other thing is, if you look back to old footage of driver briefings, it used to be televised. I don't think it's televised anymore, or at least there was footage of it. You could really see Charlie Whiting involved with the drivers and almost making a decision together. So there wasn't edicts coming down. There was a really funny clip, if you look it up, where Romain Grosjean was basically trying to subtly dob in Lewis Hamilton for undoing his seatbelt. Did you catch that one, Brad? For undoing his seatbelt during celebrations. And Charlie Whiting had sort of misunderstood that maybe you could loosen your belt, and that's what Hamilton was doing to wave to the crowd. And you could see Hamilton there, like shrinking down in his seat like a naughty schoolboy, because he was like, yeah, I'll let you think that you can loosen it. And in the end, he just confesses, no, I just undo it. But you could see that collaborative conversation, couldn't you? And you go, okay, well, you know, what do you guys think? Should you be able to undo it, or do we agree? And Lewis is coming back with, well, I'm driving really slowly, acknowledging the crowd. It just seemed more collaborative. So maybe that's why, apart from Vettel with the FU Charlie in Mexico, apart from that, there seemed to be a lot of respect back and forth to race control.
I think this is the same kind of situation you probably have in a lot of jobs where you've got someone who's been there for a really long time. And actually, in this case, like longer than any of the drivers have been there. And they're well respected. They've got a history of being, you know, transparent or being discussing issues. In this case, again with the drivers, and so everyone's got this collective respect for them, and they know everyone understands where everyone stands in this relationship, and they understand ultimately his decision is final. And kind of, if there are some grey areas in the rules, which inevitably there are, and we try to have fewer of them, but there will always be some. He'll be very clear about what the intention is and how we're going to police this. And essentially the race director, as I understand it in Formula One, the race director is kind of the judge, the stewards are like the jury, right, but the judge can advise the jury, you know, you can kind of guide them to come to, you know, a sensible decision and give them some clear input. That's kind of how Charlie was. And since that point, we've lost any established person that all the drivers respect. It's been like having a supply teacher since that. What's the American version of supply teacher?
I think that is the American version. We have substitute teacher, yeah.
Okay, or it might be the other way around. Who knows? But that's kind of what it's been like. And the children are more happy to rebel against that because, you know, this person's not permanent. Like, if we all gang up against them and if we all collectively kind of get
they sort of know now, don't they? They know that they can probably influence and get a race director sacked. So the next one's gonna. And
when you've got examples of, I know we go back to Massey, but this was obviously the clearest one of the race director kind of going rogue and making pretty obviously incorrect decisions, or not making decisions on things where they clearly should have been, like, referred to the stewards, then it becomes easier to to have this disarray. And every time that race director gets kicked out or replaced or sacked or resigns or whatever happens, or the FIA have two of them, so it's not even the same one each time, as we had a couple of years ago, then it's easier for this kind of miscommunication, rebellion, misunderstanding, whatever to happen. So we haven't had this stability since Charlie, and I agree. It's that we were relying on nothing happening to Charlie essentially, and also his relationship with the FIA. Because that's the other thing. If we look at this situation with Wittich, clearly, they've not been best buddies or he's been sacked. Whiting was in like this life position and had obviously a good relationship with the boss
John
of the
Tott and before. There's not quite, there's been too many changes to really pin down where the exact problem is. But look, we're in charge now. So it's our problem as co-race directors. Do you want to take turns or should we do it together? What do you think?
I think we should be open and discuss it. We can offer ideas, then test whether or not they work. I meant
at the track. I meant at the track. Are we both
I see what you mean. Sorry, I thought you meant in our discussion here. One thing I think we should lay down as a ground rule is, because there's this muddy area between race director and stewards, we should just be like general rule makers. Like the things we're saying now, we're not relying on someone else agreeing with them. This is just how it's going to be.
Our first disagreement then. So you're saying like there should be blanket rules, so you could almost go down a flowchart. These things happened, therefore penalty or no penalty. I still think that there's some room for judgment with the stewards, but we can still influence whether or not someone gets a penalty. So a couple of weird things with Michael Massey was like Brazil 2021, when Verstappen just drove Hamilton off the track. That didn't even get referred to the stewards, if I remember rightly.
He's influenced it by not referring it to them.
But that's, to me, that's like a howling error. Now, you could say the whole let them race thing is completely fine, and the stewards are on board and they've been briefed with it, but make the stewards make the decision. So by not referring it, you have almost instantly interfered and made that decision. So that's our first thing we should say, is when there's we should have a lower threshold for passing something down to the stewards. Now, you could even have a triage team of stewards, if you like, who decide if it's going to go any further. But I think, firstly, we need more stewards. So I think there's only like 5 at a track. So we're going to have a team of 15 stewards. That's my first decision as race control.
Okay, so obviously there's the problem of too many cooks spoiling the broth. But I think
1,000 stewards.
As long as you're clear that in this situation, this is what happens, instead of it all being seemingly open to interpretation and, making things unnecessarily grey, I don't see a problem with that. All you're doing by having more stewards is sharing the workload. So you can't say, but loads of stuff was happening then, so we couldn't investigate that properly. There's not an excuse. Like, the stewards aren't all on £1 million or £5 million a year salary. Like, you can afford to employ more people to look at screen. We're all doing it for free. So you can afford to get people who have gone through a training process and understand, when this happens, this is the procedure. You deal with these teams, you watch these cars or whatever it is. And then it can be escalated, and you can look at things in even more detail if it's not obvious enough.
Okay, I would trust you as race director, even though you've got a reputation for being anti-Verstappen or whatever. I would trust you because you would rather the racing decision be correct. I would trust you to refer things or not refer them. I wouldn't trust me. I mean, like, you could probably see Yuki just drive 4 cars into the track, and I'd be like, no, I didn't. I was making tea. I didn't see anything. So for the races where I'm in charge, we need to protect against my bias. So how about you have your 10 stewards there, right? And each of them have got 20 buttons. And when they think a driver should be referred for a decision, they press the button, like in Olympic boxing. If enough people press Verstappen within 30 seconds, then that automatically is up for review. And I think that takes any kind of bias out of it.
So I'm already seeing areas here where I'd like to change my role. I'm happy for you to be race director, referring stuff. I want to be the person who's actually like directing the decision being made and going through, okay, the rules say you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. Let's look at what these drivers did. Okay, they could tick this box, this box, this box. But they didn't tick this one. The rule says they need to tick that one, therefore penalty. Like, I want to be that person and making sure none of the other stewards in that little group of 10 or 15 or whatever we've agreed on are kind of failing in terms of applying logic and consistency to the situation. And you mentioned, I could have biases against certain drivers. I'm happy for us to implement the NASCAR style. All the cars are AI generated white cars or whatever you want. And in fact, I'd like that to be a prerequisite to becoming a steward. You need to pass the test of seeing multiple incidents where you don't know which car's which, and then correctly and consistently judging the right, coming to the right decision without any contradictions in the way or hypocrisy in the way you're applying things. And I'd like to see that with both cars all painted white and cars colored. And I'm sure you could see some kind of, this isn't beyond the wit of man to come to this kind of system for assessing potential stewards. Obviously, they don't remotely do anything like this. It's just like, hang on, you were an F1 driver 28 years ago and got a 5th place at Montreal. You come in. I know you haven't read the rule book and we've got no recent racing record of you, but would you come and advise these locals that are doing their first time ever stewarding and make sure you come to the right decisions? It's absolutely not surprising we get inconsistent and weird decisions when that is effectively the way the steward's office currently is.
Yeah, no, the current system is terrible, but thankfully we're in charge now. So Mark was just questioning what you were saying about NASCAR. So a lot of the engineers, if you're in the VIP area of a NASCAR team, and haven't we all been? You can see what the teams use. They have almost these AI generated car-shaped things to determine position and tactics and stuff. I didn't know the stewards used that for decisions.
No, they probably don't.
Oh, right, okay.
I heard you talking about this very thing, and I'm just kind of proposing that we just put a little bit of investment into it. Say 1 fine's worth of driver swearing money into this and develop some kind of.
There's so much system. Money washing around F1, and when even when people are talking about having sensors on the side of the track, go, oh, it would be terribly expensive. Go, why don't we price it out and compare it to, I don't know, 1 set of tires for everybody and see if that makes sense. So I've got a couple of ideas from the stuff you've said. I like a lot of it. The current system is very strange. So what we're doing is we're setting you up as like grand steward. So you're like the judge directing the stewards, and then that frees up the race director to never get involved in racing incidents. And there's no need really then for race control to be in charge of that at all, and can focus on things like proper procedure, making sure you're on top of, like, make sure the cars don't move away from the grid. Lance Stroll is in the gravel again. Make sure that we've defined these roles differently now, and there's already a bit of clarity.
And how nice is it to have that clarity and already start to understand who does what with some kind of transparency? So look at how the race director in Formula E or WEC runs. They have a direct connection to each of the drivers.
Yes.
And they clearly and concisely and professionally relay what's currently happening in terms of the directing of the race, not adjudicating, race incidents, but just in terms of the running of the event. And so you'll have full course yellow in 5, 4, the drivers know what's happening. Yep. Or you'd have, for example, beep. Okay, we've got a car in the gravel at turn 4. Everyone hold station. The lights are going to go yellow. Do not pull away from the start line. Like, how difficult is that? It's just normal. That's what you would do if you had the technology to do it, which we obviously do because it's already a thing in other FIA series.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we don't have that in F1.
Well, I don't know, because maybe we just had this one guy who was good at doing it all. So we had Charlie Whiting, who just was somehow on top of being able to manage those things. But now let's just have the race director direct the event. That's good. Phew. So I'm not having to make any decisions. I love the idea of this training program of white cars in incidents. And I've got just like a little idea. Why don't we just go around an F3 track on the sim in white cars, and I will just be a hooligan against you. We'll make a bunch of little scenarios and incidents, and we can like play whose fault it is with it. That might be a fun video.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can do that with actual incidents that have happened, but just delete all the liveries from iRacing. So everyone's just in the same livery, and then you'd never know who was who, because iRacing obviously retrospectively applies liveries on top of like a replay file. So you can change that whenever. So that's easily done, and that's obviously something that you could, if someone paid me a small amount of money and gave me a week to set up a steward training course and have these kind of scenarios, and then say, okay, now we will test each of these, potentially new stewards to judge these situations. They get all the information they need. They can go to different camera angles. They can look at the positioning of each of the cars. They can slow things down. And then at the end of that, they come back with their decisions, what penalties they would give based on a menu. They've got rules on a sheet so they can see how these rules apply and then apply them. And if they come back and they get some wrong, or, as a collective, we've decided, no, when you correctly apply these rules, this car should get a penalty because, and then you've got the reasons. If the potential steward come back with the wrong ones, you can then discuss with them and understand why they failed to apply that logic. If there are any situations where, it's difficult to decide or maybe they correct our decisions, we'll listen to it and we'll come to better rules.
Also, there are other series. I believe in is it WEC, where the race director just goes on camera afterwards and goes through all the decisions and says, this is why we made that decision. This is the precedent we were citing or the rule we're citing. And yes, every referee always has to make a decision on the spot. And that sometimes leads to errors, but at least there's the thought process mapped out. And then they can go, right, look, we have these specific scenarios that we've gone through. We think this is very close to scenario C, and scenario C is regarded as a penalty for the defending driver, and just have a little bit more openness and transparency. Because at the moment, the scrawls that get issued, like you can tell when it's a particular steward because it's a word salad and it's like 8 paragraphs of the thinking, and it doesn't quite satisfy, I think, the fans' justification and the fans' need for justification. So that is unclear at the moment. So I like the idea of having these set scenarios. There's enough scenarios that they've got something to refer to. And if something new comes along, well, you go, okay, it's not going to take long. Let's now add this new scenario that's happened, decide what we think should happen going forward. And that's now added to the library of racing incidents. So I know you wanted to have the rules be clear and have almost this flow chart that you can adhere to. But at the moment, there's 2 justifications you can argue with the rules to fit what you want to happen. And this is happening with people on TV, people in the media, where they switch between the very specific secret 2024 rules, which I think we've both got now and we've read, but were never issued.
And I don't think they were actually that much different. They
weren't hugely different, no.
To be honest.
But like I have them now, so for the next 3 races at least, I can refer to them, which the fans should be able to refer to the rules anyway. And then there's this international sporting code. So, for example, you had people on TV saying, but it doesn't specifically say here that Max Verstappen can't put spikes in the road. Therefore, his spikes that he laid out in the road before the race, Dick Dastardly style, is legal because it didn't specifically say that. But then the International Sporting Code has loads of things in there that cover it, about dangerous driving, about moving, about driving in an unusual way. And also, Brad, we keep getting this God clause thrown at us where basically the FIM race directors can make any decision as and when. But for the Verstappen one in COTA, it was very, no, but technically it doesn't specifically say you can't do that. So it's okay to just ram him off, then slow down. But then when it came to deciding the starting order of the grid, if they were unable to run qualifying, we were like, okay, well, the very specific rules say that it's going to be from FP1. And we had all the grown-up media, Brad, arguing with us, going, no, but in this case, the overarching international sporting code and this God mode that the directors are allowed to do whatever they want. Actually, in this case, it's that applies and not the very specific writing. So we need to clarify this up. Firstly, open. Whatever the rules are, we're going to just issue them to everyone, Brad. We're going to leak them. We're going to leak them like they're a Deadpool concept. And then you go, well, we can do it. We can have a overarching kind of general set of rules where it's like, don't be a turnip, and then have your specific rules underneath it.
Right. So it's interesting that you talk about like the God mode, because this does remind me of many non-specific religious texts where they'll have multiple conflicting things. So anyone can point to anyone of any belief can say, it says this here, see, and it says this in a different part, and someone with totally different views can point to that one. And that's obviously a problem in any situation, but when it comes to sporting rules, that's a clear problem. I also think, though, in this situation, in the Formula One application, this is a problem in terms of the just applying rules and picking and choosing which ones to apply. Because with this ISC, there literally are overarching regulations which say certain things, like, for example, you may not deliberately crowd another vehicle off track or another driver off track, or drive in a way deemed to be dangerous.
Yeah.
That is like a really clear rule. And then you have rules in Formula One which specifically then allow the opposite of that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That you can't have that. So you can't have an overarching rule which is then directly contradicted by a more specific rule. The more specific rule should be clarifying exactly how much of the overarching rule you apply in certain situations, rather than saying, oh no, you can do the opposite. So that's definitely a problem. And yeah, I think, sorry, what was the second thing you said, Spanners? It was, you spoke about, there was something I really wanted to pick up on that you finished with, but you did like a map where you said loads of stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I made several points in a row. But yeah, so because I wrote things down that I want to speak about. So I think it was having the International Sporting Code.
I remember. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, just having this like the power to essentially then say, well, this person has their God mode, and actually the rule is whatever we say it is. Because as was given with Michael Massey and the whole Abu Dhabi 21 thing, where it was, well, actually the race director has ultimate authority over the race. It's like, all right, well, this is like a movie where someone has infinite powers and nothing matters, or it was just all a dream, nothing matters. You've lost all jeopardy and you've lost all reason to have any rules at all at that point.
But
because if ultimately the race director or whoever can just make it up, then nothing matters. So that can't be a thing. You can't give someone that much power. So neither you or I in this situation can have that power. It's just inappropriate and makes everything fall apart, and gives people the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I know he got it wrong as per what it was written down in the rules, but he's got power to do anything. And you can't have contradicting international sporting code, which covers all motorsport, and specific rules for Formula One. There we go. I think that's all the stuff I wanted to say.
Because you said you compared me to Matt. Come on. What, the tech guy? Can't do that. Stuart in the patron chat has just said Spanners is channeling his inner Matt with the multi-part question. It wasn't a question. It was a multi-part rant. Thank you very much. So very, very different. But yeah, the God mode has to go, because they said, well, the race director has overriding authority to do anything. Well, he can't send the safety car out backwards, can he? So he can't go, right, the safety car's going in reverse.
I brought this up at the time.
Add 5 laps. Add 5 laps then. Well, if you can do anything, add 5 laps or void 2 laps. And
what's frustrating is, I know we're like clarifying that we don't want that line even written in our rule book, but even with that written in there, it would be very easy to just apply common sense. So I brought this up before. I brought this up at the time when we were talking about this in 2021. My other half, who has a legal background, said to me immediately, yeah, but obviously if you took that to a court of law, they'd say that doesn't make any sense. Like that can't. Yeah, but even that overriding authority thing, it's a case of, he's got overriding authority within his powers, like to apply these regulations. It doesn't say anywhere about he can make up new stuff, and that's obviously the power that has been pointed to. When these kind of bad decisions have then tried to be justified, in this season as well. Okay, so this is where it gets handed over to you a little bit more. So now I think I'd like to talk about the actual rules that we want to apply in overtaking. So clearly at the moment, it's a garbage fire. So I sat and read those 2024 regulations, and I don't know how to share a PDF, but someone shared it in the... Ask Joe. Joe Saywood. Oh, we're speaking to Joe. Joe Saywood is going to be joining us 3 p.m. We'll go live. He's in Vegas, but we'll go live at 3 p.m. Tuesday. So next Tuesday. So on Sunday, me and Jono are doing a news roundup. Matt's having the weekend off. I'll catch up with Joe. And I said to Matt, Matt's got to have some time off, because the Vegas one's going to kill him. Because I think for him, he's going to be doing the race review at like 2-3 in the morning for him, which is nice because it's normally me
doing that for the American races. So that's our schedule coming up. So we will have Joe. But yeah, so I read that PDF, and the rules are written terribly. I was expecting to sit down there and like, oh, we've got the oracle of all the information and, searching for all the keywords. In the end, I just scrolled down it and read it. Everything is incredibly vague and it's so sloppily written. I think I've said this on here before, but when they added all the stuff about the sprint weekend, they didn't add a separate paragraph for what happens at the sprint weekend. They just added or sprint qualifying in qualifying and then just added or sprint, and they didn't even put a comma or brackets or anything, so it's wildly open to misinterpretation. It's horribly written. But we want to get down to the rules of what we can do on track. What would you say at the moment is the major problem with deciding whose fault it is?
So firstly, just with the rules set that we've got there, which we're potentially about to completely tear up, even that could operate fine if you had a Charlie Whiting style person saying, no, of course what we mean by this.
Yeah. Common sense.
No, you can't get away with misinterpreting it. I'm telling you what the interpretation is, and it's this, so deal with it.
Yeah, no,
that
Brad,
can work.
That's a really good point. Like, a lot of the justification is, look at the way I've deliberately misinterpreted this wording.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know it seems like it should be saying the common sense thing, but actually, technically, linguistically, it could mean this bizarre thing that I want it to mean.
That's the any doesn't mean all or whatever thing. Yeah. It's like, no, it means the thing that we say it means, and we all understand that. So yeah, that's one option. Alternatively, you can do what I'm going to propose, which is kind of actually a combination of writing it better and doing that thing. So actually being firm with your application and consistent with your application. But I'm going to suggest, first of all, not overcomplicating things. I think in a drive to try and avoid these gray areas, the rules have ended up being a minefield of potential interpretations and gray areas. Every time you insert an additional specific, you open up kind of two more opportunities for someone to interpret either side of it. And so I think it's, for example, this is the most obvious one for me with these rules. So I will get specific now. The way we have different adjudication and different ways of applying a rule for whether or not you're attacking or defending, it's absolutely unnecessary. You're talking about cars, and more often than not two cars, but it could be multiple, trying to occupy the same part of the track, trying to get past each other or stop another car coming past. But essentially, as we've found very recently with Formula One events, an overtake and a defend are a fluid situation. So we shouldn't be judging them separately. It should just be when you're on this part of the track and a car is in this position relative to you, you are or are not allowed to push them off. I don't want you to be allowed to push people off, but if that was the rule, it should be the same both ways round. It is crazy to me that we ended up in a situation where someone could argue, or we weren't even sure, was Max attacking or defending? Which rule do we apply? It's not
written everywhere. It's not written anywhere. And when McLaren decided to appeal, I was like, oh, well, okay, good. I mean, you're going to look at the International Sporting Code and you're going to kind of go, well, what Max did is dangerous to lift off and make Norris avoid him for one thing, and then it's against the sporting code. You can't drive unusually, so he lifted off the throttle and didn't accelerate, which meant that unless Norris stopped, he was going to overtake and therefore gain an advantage overtaking. I thought they were going to do all that, but their defense was that actually because he'd got past on the straight, he was then the defending car by the time they got to the corner, and there's no definition of it. And it just reminded me of Ned Stark going with a piece of paper saying that Robert Baratheon said he was going to be king, and then Cersei just rips it up and goes, no, we're going to murder you instead. And it was so the FIA could just go, no, actually you have to have overtaken fully through the corner and then you're the overtaking car for the next corner. All right, where was that written down? It obviously isn't written down everywhere, or McLaren would never have brought that as justification.
Yeah, and that's just an example of where we're quite happy to ignore a thing or say, oh, no, that is allowed because there's not a specific rule for it. And then here, we're now defining... This is why it's silly, because we're now, to try and apply these rules we currently have, we're having to overly define who is the overtaking and who is the defending car. Have you overtaken when you are, your nose is ahead? That counts if you're at the finish line.
Yeah, if
the nose of my car gets to the white line at the finish first, then I won. I was ahead. Yet in this specific situation
It
of
didn't count.
overtaking and defending, you have to be fully past and
Well,
your
no,
rear wing
he
has to be
was fully passed, but the
But it
judgment
wasn't-
was, yeah, they hadn't finished the maneuver. It wasn't complete. So
Yeah.
here, to
It's
overtake,
ridiculous.
you have to get past and then stay past for a undetermined amount of time, and then you claim the right to be the overtaking car. So, yeah, very silly. That one was silly.
This could have all been cleared up, this specific thing, back in 2008 at Spa when Raikkonen and Hamilton were fighting, and
Hamilton, yeah.
Yeah, and Hamilton let Raikkonen back through and then overtook him at the next corner, and the steward said, but he didn't let him overtake him for long enough, or whatever it was. Anyway, back to today. How nice would it be to have a situation where it doesn't matter what the definition of overtake is, or who was ahead and who was attacking, who was defending, because it doesn't matter. It, like in every other racing scenario that I've been involved with in my race driving life, you have to not push people off the track. It doesn't matter if you're attacking or defending. It's like you have to stop moving towards another car when you get to the other car. If you're both moving towards each other, there's obviously shared responsibility, but you can look at that situation and say who was moving towards the other person at a faster rate. And if it's not particularly clear, that's a racing incident, isn't it? If it's really clear that someone was moving half a meter to the right, the other person moved 20 meters across to the left, then it's the person moving left. It's obviously their fault. This isn't difficult at all. And it matters not whether they're attacking or defending. So, I mean, there we go. As a very brief initial framework with no additional work done, we've got something slightly better already.
Oh, this is time for me to bring up a 30-year grievance now. Was it 94 where it was Schumacher versus Damon Hill?
Yes.
And it was 30 years, and I'm still like... And another thing, I'm still like that 30 years later.
I've got loads of those to add.
But yeah, because Schumacher was, I think he was on the inside, recovered, went to the outside, and then all the way back to the inside again. And you go, well, clearly, one driver was doing a lot more in that incident. And it still baffles me how that was not penalised.
Yeah, I remember. I was young at the time, a lot younger than...
That shook my faith in sport.
I was 8 years old, I think, when that happened, because it would have been before December. Yeah, so... I remember seeing that, or at least seeing replays of it, and thinking, yeah, okay, but obviously he can't win the championship.
You can't just do that.
He'll be disqualified from the championship. You can't be like, oh, well, I'm far enough in front in points that if we both don't finish, then I win. So I'll do something illegal. Doesn't even matter if you get disqualified. That can't be allowed. Like, surely that's like, that really appealed to my early sense of fairness. And I was really confused as to how he got to keep it.
And then 2 years later, he did get disqualified for pretty much the same general kind of tactic, but he was in second place anyway. And that shook it even more because, so now you can do it now that you're not having to take someone's title away.
Yeah, Jerez 97 proved that they actually did have those powers. But yes, that was strange. But we can look at the Schumacher Hill incident if you want. That was a really obvious one.
No, I don't know.
Decide
Mark says 30 years almost to the day. I think I remember it well. I was furious too. Sorry to trigger a bunch of middle-aged British F1 fans there. Okay, so let's get down to the fine tax then, if you like. So in general, on a straight, if one car is moving more towards the other, and then it's a lot clearer. And I think I've done this a load in iRacing where I will just doggedly keep my position in the middle of the track. And if people come over and hit me and then they go, hey, you hit me. And then you look at the replay and that's, obviously a bit more straightforward. But when it comes to the corners, it's really hard to tell. Well, on the straight, you've got, say, a middle line, run it a seam down the road that you can look at. In the corner, is there an expected line? How can you really determine who is moving towards who?
Okay, so I also find this relatively clear, this situation. So I know corners are more complicated to judge than a straight, but straights and corners on different tracks have some kind of movement to them. A straight is very rarely exactly straight. Sometimes the track gets narrower. Sometimes one side of the track might move across. So even a straight isn't completely standardized. And corners aren't either. We have different widths of corner and different tightnesses of corner, and things change in the middle. But we can go into more specifics and talk about those things when they're required. I think I'll
do that for you in a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So as a basic framework, I still think you can judge the trajectory of the car versus the white line at the edge of the track. And I've said this many times, but for those of you who haven't heard about my proposed lane system, imagine you've split the entire track into effectively a running track with lanes that go parallel to the like a motorway or a freeway, where lanes go parallel to the shape of the road or the track that you're on. And provided you stay in your one, then you can't be deemed to be moving towards another car. And obviously a racing line doesn't follow that trajectory. Racing line crosses pretty much all the lanes most of the time. And you're allowed to use that, provided there's not already a car on the bit of track you want to use. And I find that pretty simple. If a car is moving towards another car, regardless of whether that's on the racing line or not, if you are on the racing line, you don't have a God-given right to use any bit of track you want just because you're on the racing line. So if you arrive at another car, you need to stop turning. And if that car is following their lane, or they're not necessarily moving towards you, they're just following the shape of the track, then that's fine. And then you can apply this who's moving towards whom at a greater rate kind of idea. So that as a starting point, there's that. Obviously, I understand not all tracks are uniform, and then we can look at those examples when required.
Okay, so I'm going to use Silverstone 2021 as an example then, because I'm going to argue now that your system clearly puts Hamilton at fault. So if we say that the inside lane of a 4-lane motorway through this corner is lane 1, 2, 3, and then 4 on the outside, effectively the racing line, obviously you would normally start at 4 and you cross 3, 2, 1 to the apex, and then 2, 3, 4 back out, right? I think, is everyone following that? Am I explaining that well enough?
I understand. I'm really struggling to see how you're putting this one on Hamilton. So
okay. So, but in this scenario, the main thing that Verstappen did was close in and squeeze the corner by moving to lane 2, forcing Hamilton into lane 1. But then Verstappen on the exit, if you look at his trajectory, wasn't going to go all the way out to lane 4. He wanted to stay in lane 2. Hamilton was vaguely, he was never going to stay in lane 1 all the way round. He was going to have to move out to the lanes. And so my thinking of why that was Verstappen's fault initially was that he wanted to squeeze on the in the entry and then squeeze on the exit as well, not leaving Hamilton anywhere to go. But under your lane system, isn't Hamilton moving out towards lane 2 when there's already a car there?
No, essentially. I don't think you're applying my rule in this situation. Okay. So I'm saying whoever, you're allowed to cross the lanes as long as there's not a car there. And both of these drivers are crossing lanes. So I've said the race, being on the racing line doesn't give you any additional
you haven't got a right just to go onto the racing line.
No. And Verstappen in this situation is taking the racing line, going from the outside lane all the way to the inside lane. So he's crossing, say, 6 lanes.
Right.
And it really is a wide bit of track. Hamilton is very slightly understeering wide, which again has never been a crime that I've seen before, but it was apparently in this situation deemed a crime. And he's moving, say, half a lane. Let's say 1 lane he's moving just to really cover all bases. It's really obvious who's moving towards whom at a greater rate in that situation. So I'd say you can easily apply that lane system to that. That's exactly how I saw it at the time. You can also go into slightly more depth. So this is the Silverstone 21 example it's an evocative and emotive example. And I wish we had a different one to use.
But
it's one that everyone knows. It's one that everyone can recall, and you can kind of picture what happened.
Well, I've got a less one with drivers that you don't care about. So I've got Austria, I think it was 22, and it was on turn 4. Apologies if I've got the details wrong. And it was Perez on the outside, Russell on the inside. Now, that's the corner that goes downhill. All the cars want to understeer, but essentially, they're going into it side by side. Russell is taking the apex, but Perez on the exit, instead of going to the outside so that Russell's got room to open up the steering, kind of stays in the middle of the track, and Russell hits him. Now, Russell got the penalty in that situation, but I was like, oh, that's a bit cheeky, but to be fair, is Perez obliged to go to the outside to give Russell all that room?
No, I need to see this one again to see the exact mechanics. And this is why I say, although the Silverstone 21 one is
as I described it.
Yeah, so assuming there's other context though, I want to know, was Perez there the whole time? Did he arrive there when Russell was already running wide?
Yeah, they were both pretty much there, yeah.
Because these are things which come into, the more developed.
Yeah, there was no dive bomb, there was no yeet. They were pretty much going around together.
Was it Russell overtaking Perez? As in, was Russell diving down his inside?
It didn't matter.
it doesn't matter in terms of.
Yes, it was Perez making. It was Russell making an overtake, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to picture what was actually happening in my mind.
He got the run down to turn 4.
Okay. So in that situation, I think provided Perez is there the entire time and it's exactly as you say, I really need to see it again. This is why it's difficult without seeing the
That's right.
replay in front
We
of you.
can invent an
Perez
imaginary.
Perez hasn't changed lane. He's been consistent. Russell has moved towards Perez. So I think in that situation, if I'm picturing this correctly, then it is Russell's fault. What's different, and this is also in terms of when someone is making a dive bomb or not making a dive bomb, which I think is judged incorrectly a lot of the time, is if someone is already committed to a particular line and then another car appears. Because we
Arrives,
haven't
yeah.
actually defined this. In talking about these lanes, we're assuming that both cars are always there. So in the Hamilton, Verstappen, Silverstone situation, this is why it's quite a good example, even though it gets people emotional in different directions, is that both of those drivers were always alongside each other. And the way it's described frequently, and I think the way it was adjudicated at the time, is as if Hamilton had suddenly arrived on the scene when Verstappen was already on his way to an apex, when it was pretty, it was quite okay for Verstappen to assume no one was going to be there when he got there, and Hamilton suddenly arrived. That is not the situation.
No, it's the opposite. Hamilton was falling away, if anything.
Yeah, they were both always there. And yeah, one driver was trying to effectively withdraw from the situation, seeing what might be about to happen. The reason I was questioning the Perez-Russell example and asking whether or not it was Russell overtaking Perez is obviously if Russell is arriving on the scene and Perez is taking a particular line, then there is a bit more onus on Russell to see what's happening in front of him. Maybe Perez was already committed to a line. But likewise, if it was the other way around, if Russell was committed to his line, which is naturally going to take him wide on the exit of turn 4, and Perez then tries to drive around the outside and insert himself into a situation over which Russell has no ability to change, he's already committed to a trajectory, then it's different. So this is where the lane system is like, this is where our flowchart comes in.
Yeah, so the first split in the flowchart is were drivers alongside each other going into the incident. If so, follow flowchart A. If not, flowchart B.
And there's also something which we've spoken about. I haven't mentioned it obviously in this discussion yet. And people listening at home, when they're hearing my bizarre lane situation, might ask the question, but what if both drivers are running wide together, for example? What if they're not on the racing line or not in their lanes, but they're both kind of moving wide of the inside at a similar rate or at the same rate? And that then comes into the part of the flowchart which talks about consent. If over a period of, we could name it, or we could just say, if over a significant period, both cars have been on a similar or same trajectory, then there's kind of a consent that you're going to continue on that trajectory unless something happens. You arrive at another car, you arrive at the edge of the track, in which case, obviously, you can't expect the outside car to just keep going off the track. There's a few other little scenarios there. So although I've tried to frame this as, this is really simple, just apply this basic rule, there are obviously specifics. And this is also what then gets cleared up when you're talking about the track shape changing and not being consistent.
I also think, though, there's no real problem in having loads of caveats and different branches and loads of different examples. Like, rule books can be complicated and list lots of different examples. I think they were trying too hard to just have this one section, and it's less than half a page. The whole section about what you can and can't do in a corner, and it's all about who arrives first at the apex, was a very poorly written half a page of A4. Whereas in reality, there's no reason for it to be there's no reason for it to not be complicated, because there's lots of complicated scenarios.
The arriving at the apex first part of these rules also is being thrown out with the are you attacking, are you defending part of this rule. Like that, they're all gone. So in our version, that's irrelevant, as it always has been. Who gets to the apex first was always a silly criteria. Yeah. And we've seen it played out that it obviously doesn't actually work. It gives this whole, the only thing I need to do is arrive at the apex first kind of mentality, and then causes additional problems. So that's gone in our world. And I just want to address a question from Mark in the chat, or a point. He says, I don't think the lanes are parallel. They're following the racing line. That's these consented lanes that I'm talking about. So if both drivers are not following the shape of the track, but they're both moving towards the inside of the track at the same rate, that's fine, because you can see, you've got the ability to see what the other car is doing or use your judgment, and no one's moving towards anyone else at a greater rate at that point. If one of them stops moving for whatever reason, we can go into that, then you've got like an additional
that's fine.
criteria.
So, see, at that point you go, we're in a scenario where they are doing a consented line, and then suddenly the outside car has decided to tighten up, or the inside car has decided to open the steering. Therefore, one has deviated from this consented line that they were in.
And it's reasonable then to not expect the other driver to know that was going to happen. You should know it's going to happen if the reason they've stopped moving away is that they've got to the edge of the track. And that is when this is the situation we see all the time. Someone's walking another driver to the edge. And in our current rule set, you then go, were they ahead at the apex? In which case they're allowed to keep going and they'll push them off. If they weren't ahead at the apex, they've got to leave them that space. And that isn't a factor in our rules. Okay. You have to always stop when you get to the edge of the track.
What would have happened in these rules? I don't know if we've seen it. If we had a driver who was ahead at the apex down the inside by essentially dive bombing, but the outside driver just stayed on track, and then the inside driver just clattered into the outside driver. It's not happened because in all these scenarios, people have gotten out of Verstappen's way. I'm making it sound like it's always Verstappen, but he's done a few of these. The other driver doesn't want to.
They're obviously the most high-profile ones we can think of.
Yeah, so Norris obviously doesn't want to just be hit by a weapon charging through, but I just feel like if he'd have stayed on track and Verstappen hits him, regardless of who was ahead at the apex, it's going to be pretty obvious that Verstappen did a dive bomb and just smashed into him.
So in our rules, absolutely, you're not allowed to keep moving towards someone once you get to them. So in that situation, it's easy for us to decide, yes, of course, it was the car that kept going towards the other car. In reality, I don't agree with you. I think given the rules we currently have, it would be placed on Norris.
Fault. Wow.
They would say, because Verstappen got to the apex first. He's allowed to run you off the track. You didn't run off the track. You stayed there. You should have got out of the way.
Even if he's let off the brakes, just to let off the brakes to go around to the outside, Norris has to jump out of the way.
Public opinion might not be that. And the stewards may well then adjudicate it inconsistently and say, in this situation, we think Max hit him. But there's no rhyme or reason to that based on what we've seen and the way they've judged things given this rule set. So I would not be surprised at all if they hadn't said, that's the car on the outside's fault, because the rules say the driver on the inside is allowed to do that. Okay. And this is where, in our version of the stewards' rulings, there should be quite a clear, are you allowed to do this thing? If yes, then it's fine. If no, then we move on to the next step.
Question then. Okay, so in our rules, you are consenting towards sort of the outside, but it's not clear whether you're, going to hit an exact point on an exit. So under our rules, do I have to let the car on the outside of me stay on track? And if I don't, does the car on the outside have to jump out of my way?
So we can come to a bit of an agreement here, because staying on track, we need to decide whether we mean staying on a usable piece of track, which includes curbs and potentially green runoff, because, like painted asphalt, because as long as you've got one tire on, it's legal to go off and use the green bits or whatever other color they happen to be painted. Or do we want to say, no, by our definition, when you get to the white line, you've got to stop. Now, I think probably the cleaner, easier to consistently police version of this is white line. You can't push them up onto the curb. And the reason I say this is because curbs end. So at some point, if you are allowed to push someone to the curb, they're going to want to naturally rejoin. And you can either say, well, tough luck. They've given you the space. If you get to the end of the curb and there's nothing in front of the driver that's on track, they can carry on straight. But there is grass in front of you. You've got a choice of, do I carry straight on and go on the grass, or do I lift off? Then obviously you've got to lift off.
That's what I did to Kyle. I basically ran him off track at Buckmore, where there was a turn where in the corner there was enough concrete, but then I just stayed in a straight line and the runoff ran out and it was just grass.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that's exactly how I drive. If I'm racing people, and this hasn't been set out in any different way, that's the kind of room that I tend to be willing to give people. I think probably that's how most of the race drivers in Formula One would naturally play this. You'll run someone off onto the usable exit,
and then stay there.
But then but then that's it. I've given you the room. If the exit ends, that's your tough luck. I'm staying in my lane, going straight ahead. I did this to Alex Van Gien at a race recently, and he decided to rejoin into the side
anyway.
Of me. And his argument was, you didn't give me room, or you weren't all the way past, or something. I can't remember what his terrible argument was.
We can write a rule for this.
It's up to us to decide.
Yeah,
this is the thing.
We're deciding.
If we make the rule and then we apply it every time, I'm happy with either of those. So it's easier for people watching to understand if you just say, yeah, the white line. You can't push someone past the white line. That's it.
Okay, so if I'm going to make the rules, so it looks like I'm senior to you in this because I'm the race director. You're just the chief steward. You yielded power on this.
I'll apply the rules that you decide.
Right, okay, here we go. With your advisement then, I mean, the rule, you can just say, look, there are track-specific rules. Because there are on iRacing, every single event you join, it shows you what the track limits are, which ones give you a 1x or a warning for going off track. So I don't think there's any particular problem with, going up to, looking at Spa and saying, well, generally here there's runoff, but actually at turn 9, it's a natural deterrent. So on turn 9, no, you're not allowed to just run people onto the gravel. Everywhere else, there's a little bit of runoff in the corners. So as long as your competitor can keep a little bit of a tyre over the white line, we consider that fine racing. But by the way, if you do that, you are obliged to let them back on the track before you get to that bit of grass. I don't really see any problem with that, event by event.
Or you're not obliged to let them back on. Like,
sure,
whatever, I don't mind.
Yeah.
Whatever we decide. If you want the battles to last for their longest possible duration,
which I do,
then it's in our interest as an organisation. We're representatives of this sport now. It's in our interest to allow the car that would be pushed off to stay in the fight effectively. So we could just say, you have to either allow them back on, or you're not allowed to push them all the way off in the first place. It's whichever one we decide. I'm currently undecided.
Okay.
We've only been discussing it for 5 minutes. So I want to look at a few examples and I think naturally it's the one where you're allowed to push people off, and as in you're allowed to push them off onto a usable piece of runoff. Yeah. But you don't have to allow them back on.
You like that. So then it's up to them to find a way to back on. Like if you got pushed that far off, then you're on your own. You can keep one wheel on the white line and continue to use the grass if you want. So
I'm also totally fine with us not allowing that. And this is one of those things where different race directors in series I've raced in would adjudicate that completely differently. So
if it's clear from the beginning, either is probably workable. I'm erring on, you can do that as you go into the corner, but then just let them room come back on track. If there's just two of you involved in this, there's a reason why I wouldn't want it to just be you can't push them past the white line, because then I think we're turning every track into a street circuit basically.
Yeah.
And so we're narrowing every single track. If you did that rule at a Hungaroring, you kill Hungaroring.
That's a good point. And the more room, kind of the better for our sport, especially if Formula One cars are massive like they currently are. So I agree, actually. So we shouldn't just say white line. You're not allowed to push people past the white line. So let's go with,
all right,
you
like
can
it.
Push them as long as they get to keep a tyre on the track that we define the track. That's fine, but you have to let them back on again. Are we going to say that?
Oh, yes. I'm not
what
sure.
If I've got an answer? If they're alongside you, fully alongside, and you're going to have to judge this. You're a professional race driver, so you're going to have to judge, because we're going to look at it on a replay and we're going to have the objective information. If you think you are ahead of them, or we could even say half a car ahead, it depends how grey you want to make this. If you're ahead, then you don't have to let them back on. If they are alongside and they manage to stay there, then they've got a right to be allowed back on. And we could make that.
The key thing is we're going to define it. And it can be defined. And it's a little complicated. But look, the rule books are there. And you know what? It won't be complicated once the stewards, who are a professional organisation of stewards, have sat and learned it and done the course. These things they'll have done scenarios. Remember, Brad is going to do scenarios and test them all. So they'll be like, aha, this is in paragraph 6C.
So Nick D in the chat.
Yes, I was
these
about
rules
to read
feel
this.
like they're great for everywhere but street courses. And when I just essentially asked for clarification, he says specifically the pushing out part with the runoff. The thing is, if you're on a street course, there isn't runoff.
Yeah, so that's...
Or if there is, so if it is you can go wide on a kind of escape route, but then the wall comes back to the edge of the track, again, we can decide which one of these we want to do. If you've got to let them back on, then have to let them back on. If there's not very much room to do that, and maybe there's a car, what if there's a car on the other side of you and you can't let them back on? Then it's up to the driver to see, I've got a choice of move back into the side of someone or lift.
Yeah.
What would you do on the motorway, again, on the freeway? If you have a blocked lane, it's not up to the car to your side to let you in. It's up to you to not hit the thing directly in front of you. It's nice if they let you into their lane, but ultimately you are the one with the blockage. If you're driving down a two-way street and there's parked cars blocking your lane, but there's not parked cars blocking the cars coming towards you, the cars coming towards you don't have to let you through. And again, it's nice if they do, but ultimately you have to stop if there's something in front of you. And that's kind of how I see this. You've gone wide on the runoff and then the runoff ends. Well, it ends for you. The track hasn't ended for the person next to you. And that's why I lean towards this.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too bogged down on this one, because I think the way you're describing it is the more natural for in racing environments and sort of how it happens now. But look, that's one we can decide. I like it being track by track. I think with Nick's point there about it not addressing street circuits, it has, because I would define the wall as a natural barrier. So the same as we'd say, well, don't push them off in turn 9 at Spa. You can't push them into the gravel. Here, obviously, would be you can't put them into the wall. So another question I would have is about the basically, is it ever a problem when there's no contact? Because we're talking about moving into another car. If you scare another car out of your way and they move, then ultimately the position that you moved into didn't have a car in it. Yeah. So is it okay to just frighten someone into moving out of the way?
I think this is pretty much covered by a consistent application of all the other things we've said. Because if people are penalised when they move into your space, then they'll stop doing it. And you'll feel more empowered to stay where you are, stay in your lane and not jump out of the way. I think the moving out of people's way is in a large part, I mean, obviously there's some self-preservation, but there's also the fact that you think there's a chance that car's going to keep moving towards you when they get to you. If we lived in a racing world where when cars ran you wide, they stopped coming wide when they reached your car, people wouldn't feel the need to jump out of the way and then create additional space. I agree, though, this is slightly tricky because even having said all that, there may well still be situations where a driver feels bullied out of the way. I think we need to maybe focus on this a bit more in our stewards working group and come to a really clear, defined answer. However, I think we don't need to worry about this too much right now. I don't think our rules fall short here in any way. They certainly cover it more than they are currently covered, because at the moment, the stewards can go, no, he moved out of his way, so he wasn't pushing him off. Or, oh yeah, no, he didn't move out of the way. They could interpret it either way, essentially, is what I'm saying. Whereas in ours, I think because you're not allowed to keep moving into occupied space, someone will feel more of a right to continue occupying the space, if that makes sense.
I think we've made a good start here. We're an hour in, and I know you've got to go shopping for go-kart parts. So I think I'm happy to call this part 1, because we've addressed the major issue that we're having in F1 right now, is that battle in the corners. I mean, there's loads and loads of other rules that I'd love to go into and discuss. So how to police track limits in qualifying, for example, the actual amount of penalty you get for certain things, because they seem really restricted on it. And if that's probably the last one I'll do today, Brad. They seem like they can only do a 10 or 5 second penalty. When was the last time someone got a drive-through? When was the last time someone got black flagged for a racing incident? It doesn't seem like they have some teeth. So you have somebody run someone off track or overtake off track, you get 10 seconds and they go, well, I'll just run down the road. If you're in a faster car and you're trying to overtake a Haas, for example, that's got a straight line advantage, just go around. Use the off track, just go around and go 10 seconds up the road.
Yeah, this is an obvious problem, isn't it? That I'm frustrated that we kind of forget about it. And then again, relatively soon, this kind of thing will crop up again. And you think, well, yeah, they might as well have just got the penalty and driven off. It's not really a very good deterrent, is it? And so I don't know what the answer is as to why they've stopped using drive-throughs and stop-go penalties. Essentially, there is a stop-go penalty if you use your time penalty in a pit stop, but it's not you must stop now. That's the difference. Being allowed this flexibility, and this happened at Mexico with Verstappen and Norris, obviously. Although Verstappen got a very big time penalty, he didn't have to serve it straight away because it was a time penalty at a pit stop. So you can still strategically use that. You could still, and I'd argue he did, you could still hold Norris up enough that he couldn't win the race. And it should be like it is with, in most racing series, again, where you get the penalty and you have to serve it within normally 3 laps. And that way you're removed from the problem. You've removed yourself from that racing scenario instead of being able to essentially hang around out of sequence and cause problems for the person that you've already aggrieved, which is exactly what happened in that Mexico scenario. So yeah, I think we could just bring, if a car has done a thing to affect a direct competitor in a racing situation, we have the power to remove them from the situation. Whether that's black flag or stop-go penalty or drive-through penalty, they're immediately being withdrawn from that scenario.
I quite like the iRacing one, where it basically says, right, you have to give up 5 seconds of time and you've got a minute to do it. Find a safe place to do it. It's on you on the next straight, lift enough to get rid of that time.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's the tricky part of that is it relies on a bit of judgment from the drivers, and you could still lift off in a way that inconvenienced a competitor and say, oh, but I did it though, didn't I? Again, if we're being a bit more Charlie Whiting, we would avoid that by consistently coming down hard on someone trying to take the mickey like that. But I still think you just say, yeah, drive-through penalty, must serve it within.
Yeah, the only thing is I think the pit lane, it's a long way to go through, so a drive-through is really severe. If you don't do the thing.
Don't offend, because we only penalise people who have broken the rules, so just don't break the rules and you're fine.
But also, I mean, you could get smart. If there was room, you have a little penalty lane. There's all these little bits where you have extra runoff, or you have to go through a cone if you cut a corner, and Alonso uses that to good effect. He seems to never try to make turn 1 anymore, Alonso. He looks for that little penalty escape road. But, you could basically have some cones to drive through. You can get inventive. We've been hired for this job. It's their fault. I'm going to make a little penalty chicane that you've got to go through. There you go, if you get a penalty. Right, we'll call that the end of part 1. If you have to go, Brad, just sort of wave your arms in the air and I'll continue. But I just wanted to answer the listener question here, and it's about sim racing. So if you're not interested in that, we will see you on Sunday. Me and Jono are going to do a news breakdown. There's tons of news coming up. It looks like the Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari transition has already happened. He's not getting Enzo Ferrari's apartment. That was all a rumor. I think we're going to go through a bit more of the history of how the FIA in its current presidency has got to this point. There was a lot of stuff about Aston Martin as well. We nearly did kind of a breaking news thing on it, but it's not quite that high profile, and we wanted to see how the story has developed. And there's a ton of other news as well. And then Joe Saywood, I think, is joining us on Tuesday afternoon too. So Brad, here's the question. And we get loads of sim racing questions like this. This is why I wanted to answer it. Since you're the best one out of everyone else, yeah, well, me and Brad, I was thinking about getting into a sim and wondered if you could help me. Not sure if you've done an episode about racing rigs and what choices they are. It could make good off-season content. Well, we'll just do it here. Just a thought in your suggestion box. And that is from Romeo. Thank you very much. So when people want to get started in sim racing, it can seem really, really daunting when you see people like Brad with their triple screens. And how much is your... Are we okay to talk? Are we safe?
Let's not talk about it.
Are you in a safe spot?
No, it's fine. Yeah, my other half isn't here, and she's lost interest now.
But
it was all in the past.
Your box, just the box that delivers, not even the steering bit that you hold on to, is £1,200, and that is a 27 Newton meter beast. Just about the best one you can get. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. It's been quite a while since I've actually bought sim equipment, because I've got such good stuff that it kind of it's lasting a really long time. It's difficult for it to be that much better. There's obviously software changes and that kind of thing, but essentially my hardware is kind of as good as it gets. And you're right, the wheelbase I've got here, very, very expensive, very, very powerful and heavy duty, and it's the same as most F1 drivers have in their homes.
I mean, I even just got the one below it. Because we were massively in COVID, we got massively into our sim racing. I've got the one below it. I've got a donated wheel rim, so I saved money on that. Thank you very much to Sam for that, and then I've got a full like metal rig, so everything is rigid, and then I've got the cheapest Sparco seat available. But mine is already in the really high end of sim racing. If you're starting, shouldn't really be looking at anything like that. And then I use the Kids Quest 3 as my VR headset. But you can, I mean, when you were first indoctrinating me into sim racing, you had all the rigs and everything. I came around your house and I had a clamp-on desk, Logitech G27, I think, and I had my one laptop screen elevated so that it was up at my eye level. So you can go about your racing like that, at that level, and it's kind of fun, but it's not immersive.
Yeah, I think what's lucky for people starting out in sim racing nowadays is that there's so much good equipment, and even the lower end of the equipment spectrum is so much better than it used to be. You can still get, I believe, the kind of absolute entry-level belt-driven wheels, generally from, I think, can I name a brand here?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely,
everyone
100%,
knows.
yeah.
So I think you even said it. Logitech is the kind of, it's what most people have started out with, and there's been various iterations of this one wheel that was called a G25 and a G27. I think it's a G29 now.
G29 was the one like the F1 drivers were picking them up during COVID to do the sim stuff. Yeah.
However, the difference in price between that and the more entry level direct drive wheels now is it's a completely blurred line. And in my opinion, you've got no point going for one of those old style plasticky wheel
with the belt driven one. So I think that's probably our first thing. One is you don't need to go for the belt driven ones anymore.
You can go directly for an entry level direct drive wheel. And if anyone wants to see some of these reviews or see what I'm talking about, I've done 2 reviews on entry level direct drive wheels on my YouTube channel. So just check out Brad Philpott on YouTube, subscribe. That would be awesome. I'm posting loads of content about karting, some cool car racing stuff coming up, and sim racing. So go check that out. I'm trying to grow that channel. And cool. We've got a review on one, and I'm not paid by these companies, but they've sent me a wheel to tell people what I think about them. A company called Camus, they do one. Mm-hmm. Company called Moser, who have also got all of these companies tend to have an ecosystem of increasingly expensive and powerful wheels. But the entry level now is so much better than the best wheels were, say, 10 years ago. So
I think the one that led this economy, or if you want to call it a baby direct drive one, is the one Alex Van Gien has got, which is the Fanatec CSL direct drive, which comes in 5 and 8 Newton meters. And to me, I think that 8 Newton meters is about where you start getting a sort of a realistic feel and a bit of wheel weight. And Alex seems very happy with it. And I think Kyle was happy with the one that you were talking about that you did a review on. There's 2 problems you're going to get caught out on. Firstly, that doesn't come with the actual wheel that you hold. So it doesn't.
Sometimes they do.
Oh, do they?
These
sometimes?
ones in my reviews do, but they're not the nicest versions of the wheel. They're like the entry level steering wheel.
So you have to shop for a couple of things: the box that generates the power, and then the bit that you actually care about and hold that's got all your buttons on and everything. So there's 2 different types of shopping when you're looking for that, if they don't come together. The other thing is that you're going to want some kind of rig to put these on. So for a Fanatec, I think we're already talking about 200, maybe £380 UK for the higher version, for the 8 Newton meter one. But you're going to want a rig to put that on. So I think that it is worthwhile doing that. And then you have to worry about if you can see the screen while you're doing it. So I think we've forgotten. I don't think you ever went through the kind of, the wobbly seat version. I don't think you ever did sim racing on a desk chair with wheels, where every time you hit the brake, your wheels go backwards. And then I had this system where I was rigging up bits of wood against the back of my chair so that when I hit the brakes, it wouldn't go back. And the first thing that really changed it for me was getting the play seat. Is that what it's called? Play seat. And it's basically a folding chair, and it puts you in quite a good race driver position. And then you can put this, whatever, your direct drive and everything. It's got a mount that you stick it on. And that feels very race drivery. It's not as good as a full aluminium rig like I've got here, but it is probably the cheapest way to getting into having a rig and a wheel.
Yeah, you're completely right. We're talking about the kind of wheelbases, the box with the electrics in that powers the steering wheel, that need something solid to mount on. So you said I didn't go through that. I had a kind of weird version where I worked at a racetrack. They had a seat that was in a race car, like a kind of reclined carbon fiber seat, had a crack in the bottom of it. They were getting rid of it. Doesn't matter if it's going to go in my spare room. And I attached with duct tape some big wooden blocks on either side of it that were effectively like the support for the seat. I used a lot of duct tape and I placed that on the floor in my spare room. And I got a little IKEA low square table and I put my old Logitech wheel on that. And I didn't need much rigidity because the TV on top of the table was enough weight to hold it down for the amount of force feedback I had. The moment you start going to these direct drive wheels we're talking about that supply a much more strong, immediate force, you just knock the TV over if you're trying to do that. So you're right. You need something rigid.
Yeah.
And so it's good to start off with some kind of solid metal frame. And the more solid you can get, the better. I would personally recommend, if you can afford to do it, going straight to the extruded aluminium style frames.
Yeah, that's what
even if that's what you've got, that's what I've got behind me here. Even if it's the thin metal version, I've got you can kind of see if anyone's watching the stream, I've got the thin kind of supports holding up the screens, big triple thickness ones holding the frame itself up. But even the thin ones are fine for the majority of these wheelbases. So if you want to start off smaller, then you can. It's one of those things, though, you will become addicted to it and you will upgrade. So you will end up buying twice if you start off with
that is the issue. So the best thing to do is go to your friend's house and try theirs, and then you'll know, I want to get into this and I can drop £1,000 on this hobby. But it's a hobby that's more like golf than video games, which I think is something that people don't, they think, oh, it's an extension of video games. No, it's a whole ecosystem. You've got to think of it as like, I'm going to the golf club, I'm going to have to pay my subscription to my sim service, and then I'm going to have to go and get my if you go and get secondhand golf clubs on eBay, after 6 months you're like, oh, I wish I'd just gone and got the clubs from the shop. And we're sorry if we're spending money on anyone's behalf, but I think at the moment, if you want to go and I want to do some iRacing properly, the minimum level is this play seat. And thank you, chat, again. It's called the play seat challenge. And even with that, it's a bit more flexible. So when you try and steer, you get this upward movement that actually takes some force out of the wheel. And I fixed that by having 2 ratchet straps where I use the ratchet straps to really pinch the mounting so that it can't move anywhere. But I found when I did that, when I moved to the aluminium frame, every single track, I was several tenths faster because that rigidity really, really makes it. But honestly, you're going to have a good experience with that entry-level DD wheel in a play seat challenge, propped up in front of a decent TV screen. That will get you somewhere, but eventually you're going to want a frame with your screens in front of you.
I would argue that the setup you've just described there, which we consider, the kind of starting point for most people in sim racing, that will give you such a closer idea of what an actual race driver goes through. If you're using iRacing, for example, with that setup, that gives you such a close approximation to the experience of real world racing, especially if you compare it to like other video games trying to simulate other activities. So playing football, for example, FIFA on the PlayStation, is not remotely going through what an actual football player is going through. Whereas when you're driving on a sim, even an entry-level one, you're using the exact same lines, exact same inputs. You're probably using the same amount of steering angle to get through the same simulated corner on the track as the drivers in real life are doing. And it was accurate 10 years ago or more. It's really accurate nowadays. And you'll have, if you haven't done it before, it'll give you a vastly improved.
Well, you have a direct comparison between real life and sim on, say, something like the Nordschleife or even Silverstone.
Yeah, I've been a real full believer in the benefits of sim driving to help your real world driving for as long as I can remember, since before R Factor 1 came out and we were driving on Grand Prix Legends before we even had direct drive wheels. It was still accurate enough then that you could draw parallels. And obviously as time has gone on and the lines have been blurred more and more and more, and the equipment's become better, it's given you a more accurate representation, the scanning of the tracks has become better, the models of the cars, everything. And now we're at the point where weather's being simulated better and better and better.
No, I don't like that.
The amount of detail, I know you don't. The amount of detail that goes into it nowadays with the equipment that we've got, I've said this before on the podcast, and I won't labor the point, but I've had situations in real life and on the sim where I've forgotten which one it was I was doing. I've been at the Nordschleife in real life, going down into Foxhole, and I've had a momentary kind of realization that I wasn't sure if this was on iRacing or if it was real. And then you kind of recalibrate and go, no, this one's real. I heard a noise that I don't hear on iRacing where it's like a different vibration. But it's easy enough to get lost, and people don't have that when they're using a PlayStation controller.
Okay, this is why I think people need to do it in VR. So the VR market hasn't kicked off in the same way that I really wished it would, with even Microsoft have withdrawn their support for the Reverb, which I thought was the best headset. Mine died anyway, but now I don't think anyone can use it anymore anyway. So I'm using the Quest 3, which is a really good consumer device anyway for the kids. And actually, it's so immersive. You talking about getting confused is horrifying, by the way. You're bombing down the Nordschleife and going, wait a minute, am I playing a video game? But I've had ones where I've been in the sim in an MX-5, finished the race, driven it back to the pits, and then tried to open the door. Like I've looked for a door handle and gone, oh, no. But the other way round I've had it is that I've tried to clear my windscreen with a button on my real life steering wheel that isn't there. Yes. And I'm like, oh no, I've got to use a lever to make the windshield wipers go.
I've done that several times. And I've also thought to myself, the graphics are good, or this is a good version of this train. It's stupid when you think about it. It's obviously your
frame rate's good, isn't it? Life. God, the refresh rate's great.
I've been on circuit at Silverstone, driving a race car on a test day, and thought to myself, the frame rate's really good today, or something to that effect. It's so stupid, but that's how much it blurs the lines. So you can hopefully tell why Spanners and I are enthusiastic about it.
I do, and I think it makes your viewing of all levels of racing. It's the same as having an opinion on football and then you play five-a-side or even like a Saturday league. You have much more of an appreciation of what the drivers are going through. And if you want to be a sofa expert, like we are, armchair experts, it makes your armchair expert experience like a little bit cooler. And you can kid onto yourself that, you would have done something different. But competitive racing in a sim environment is different to a video game lobby. So I think this is the last thing people need to be aware of, is that a lot of like iRacing is the one we do. It is a subscription service, and it's kind of hard to swallow at first because you pay for the basic, I think it's $13 a month. And then every track, there's a lot of free ones, but you if you wanted to do F3 as a season, you would end up buying maybe 4 or 5 tracks, and you have to buy the F3 car as well. But what it encourages is it does encourage people to be invested in those series, invested in those cars, and it makes it far more of a kind of genuine club situation. So you go, okay, well, I'm thinking of now moving to the Super Formula series. That's another $13. But you know what I mean? You're invested in it, and you commit to that series, and you're racing against other people that are committed to that series, which is why I say I think that's the biggest sting for me, Brad. And that's the thing I want to put up front is if you're doing iRacing, you're subscribing to a quite expensive online service.
You are, and there are other costs that you can choose to spend or not spend in addition to your equipment and your subscriptions and paying for the tracks and things, because some people want to genuinely get better at it as a sport. I think it's realistic enough that you can,
it's definitely
there's enough prize money involved in some competitions that it's a sport, and you can go and get coaching, and that's something that I have experience of every day in my sim room in here. I'm doing driver coaching with people who are serious about trying to get better. And like just this morning, we had a session, me and a driver called, I don't know if I can say his name. I don't want to say someone's name, but a long-term driver from the other side of the world, because no one's coming here. We're doing this virtually, in different time zones. And we effectively did like a gym exercise where we had a target. He had to do certain lap time over and over and over again. And he had the pressure of me watching him and telling him that if he screwed it up, he was going to have to start from scratch again. Very much like having a personal trainer in the gym when someone is training for their sport. And that's really the level that you can go to with this. Or you can start off in a spare room with the cheapest possible wheel and pedals and eventually spend all the money, which you definitely will do.
I would say it's been such a rewarding experience, especially with the community, such as Missed Apex. And we've been doing our series as well, where, we've been able to dedicate some time into it and, go, okay, well, pay a sub of $5 per round, like you would do at a football club. You'd pay your tenner to go onto the green. And that's been able to sort of unlock time and make sure that everyone can buy content so we can broadcast it and stuff. But that community is really great. We've just wrapped up our 7th season, and we're about to put out a driver survey to see what people want for the next series as well, going into next year. It has been incredibly rewarding. It has been it's something that everyone's wife and partner is angry at Brad about, because the Bradfluence has been a thing. And so you're not going to really get into sim racing free. It is a proper hobby, definitely on golf level. But you have to be aware of that, as you go in. Or like we did, initially, was spend a lot of time on eBay. So we spent a lot of time on eBay and Facebook Marketplace trying to scrimp together the cheapest possible rigs.
And I'm actually sad that I've not managed to Bradfluence you guys into karting, although I have with Van Gien. So Alex Van Gien did go the extra step.
But the good thing about sim racing, though, it's indoors, and I don't get yelled at for going to Wales for the weekend. Brad,
true.
You've got to go off and buy some karting stuff. Go and follow Brad at BradPhilpott on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as well at SpannersReady. I apparently have a Blue Sky account that I'd forgotten about, but
I've just heard of this.
Yeah, I vowed to go over. I vowed to go over and give that a go. So I think I am SpannersReady on there, and a bunch of you have already followed on there. So I'll go and check that out. I've given up on Threads a little bit, although when I post on Instagram, it all goes to Threads anyway. So I'll do that more. Go and follow my Instagram, SpannersReady, on there. I try and have some fun on there. And Brad's YouTube channel by searching for Bradley Philpott on YouTube. Is that right?
Or Brad Philpott, or anything, any variation of that. Okay, thanks for subscribing.
That's right. It's not Brad Dude 2K anymore then.
No, that's died now, thankfully. Yeah, just my name. And that's obviously karting content, sim racing content, real world driving. And if you are one of the people that wants to get better at sim racing, just check out theracecoach.com and see what we do.
All right. Until we see you next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was us being in charge of race control on Missed Apex Podcast. I've got to run off. Dad, can you take me to climbing club? And I've forgotten all my stuff.